Miss Renu, you could go now. We can start.
We can start?
We are live.
Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Voices, a show for the community and by the community, being brought to you by Radio Zindagi. I'm Renu Dillon, the host for the show, and our topic today is the color bias in our society. So we're talking about the Desi community, okay? That's exactly what we are talking about today. But before anyone says anything, we are not going to relate this to the current protests on Black Lives Matter, since that's clearly an issue in our country and an issue that needs immediate resolution and an issue, of course, that is hopefully going to be addressed. But because of all the racism and all the comments and the participation on social media, I really felt that it was important for us to bring up the color bias that we have in our own Desi community. So special thanks first, of course, to Radio Zindagi, to our RJ Era, to Seba and Neeraj for always giving us the platform, the necessary platform for such engagement. Skin color bias is simply racism by any other name, whether you like it or not. It must be confronted just like any other form of bigotry. And in India, the mindset, in my opinion, has been adopted from the colonial mindset and the role of media in reinforcing certain stereotypes. So it is unfortunate, but our Indian society does believe in skin color, and they decide the person's worth many times based on skin color. That's from everything from television programming, billboards, advertisements. The idea of fair is beautiful is what's pushed. And so many people spend millions of dollars. It's a huge industry in India. Fair, the fair is beautiful cream, trying to look whitewashed as well as getting bleached. I've witnessed this myself in the 20 years of my experience in education, where I've actually had parents come to me and ask them to move their children's pictures from a Christmas tree simply because the pictures were posted next to somebody that was light-skinned. So on that note, I'm going to invite our panelists that have joined me today to share their views. So we'll begin with no bias towards women, of course, Sunny. We will begin with first Vinita Sood Bilani. She's the founder and artistic director of Enact Arts, a theater production house and a talent incubator for developing talent in all aspects of performing arts. So welcome, Vinita. Then we have, need to unmute you. Yeah, thank you. And then we have, of course, my good friend, Anu Natarajan, an urban planner and a community engagement specialist. Anu has served on the Fremont City Council for 10 years. She's a mom of a beautiful daughter, Pranali, and a former student of mine. And welcome, Anu, to our show.
Thank you, Renu.
Then, of course, we have Sunny Bali, another buddy of mine, entrepreneur, real estate broker, and investor involved in many activities. And he loves to voice his opinion on many issues. And that's how I selected him for this panel when I was watching him voice his opinion on the recent controversy with Sushant Singh and nepotism. So welcome, Sunny. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Renu.
For those who've tuned in, welcome. If you want to send any questions, you can call Radio Zindagi at 510-657-1170. You can also post questions on Facebook. Unfortunately, we can't invite you live on the show, but we'll definitely address your questions if we can, and we'll definitely talk about them. So let's begin our show. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
And a quick note, you may or may not agree with our opinions. That's okay. Remember, this is free speech, okay? We don't have Mr. Trump here telling us what we can do. So we can all execute our thoughts freely. So my first question is to Vinita. Vinita, how do we identify color bias? What are your thoughts on that?
I think color bias is a real thing. It exists in the Desi community. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The interesting thing about color bias is that color bias is a spectrum. When I was growing up, I was considered dark. There was some concern that I might not get a good husband because I just wasn't fair enough by Punjabi standards. But of course, in the greater spectrum of all the skin's color that we see in India, there are some who could consider me fair. I don't know what to consider myself. I actually haven't thought about it, because my response to the whole thing is that you need to judge yourself and you need to judge other people on their self-worth and not on color. So I think that's...
And absolutely. And India, I think, is actually a country that has, if we look at our color, which is meant to be brown, there are then so many different shades of brown from the spectrum, right? So how do you pick your color? So thank you for addressing that. So my next question will go to Anu. Anu, in your opinion, how does color bias impact our young girls growing up in the US? I know it's impacted a lot of young ladies and women, especially women back in India, but what about here in the US?
Yeah, first I want to thank you and Radio Zindagi for giving voice to this bias and for the introspection that as a Desi community, we need to look at ourselves and the prejudices that we have and bring it with us when we move to a different country. And in a lot of ways, it's also gendered prejudice. I mean, as Vinita mentioned and you talked about, it affects women more than men. So I'm glad Sunny's here to give his opinion about this whole issue too. I think even more than us, it impacts the young girls, especially girls who grow up in this country, because not only do they face the color bias within our community, but they also have to look at it from outside of the community and be judged in two different ways. And I think it impacts their identity, it impacts their self-worth, it impacts their confidence, and they become so focused on trying to make their skin fairer and get into all of these beauty myths about fair skin and not fair skin. And I just want to give you, and it starts really early. My kid wanted, like her friends in preschool, an American Girl doll. So we went there and willing to spend the $100+ to get this doll. Each of the other friends of hers got something that matched their skin tone. But my daughter, who's dark complexioned, couldn't find anything. It was either white, shades of white, or black. There was nothing brown or dark brown or anything that matched her color tone. And that's when it starts. It begins at that point in terms of who am I? How do I belong? Why do I not have a doll that represents me? So I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. I'm sure we don't have any of the answers, but this is really a great starting point to have this conversation and look at some of the issues that we face, and especially the younger girls face today.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, I was just watching some movies yesterday. Even in our Hindi film songs, you hear Gore Gore Gal, Goriyan Kalaiyan. You never hear Kale Kale Gal, right? We never talk about the Kali wrist, right? And that is why I talk about how this has been even pushed through music and songs, whereas fair is meant to be considered beautiful. And that's how Nandita Das is one of the actresses back in India who is considered dark, has started a whole movement on this. And she said she's always been described in all her articles as being dark and dusky, always. Right. So moving on, now we'll get the opinion from the gentleman. We've got the ladies here. So Sunny, let me ask you, you don't look dark to me by any means, but what are your personal experiences and observations on colorism? I mean, one of the people on Facebook wrote that, why have you picked somebody that's light-skinned to participate in this conversation? They didn't feel that anyone that's not dark-skinned can actually attribute their opinions to this.
So was that person talking about all of us, or?
She said that our poster didn't reflect our true colors.
Well, okay. Thank you, Renu. Thanks for the invite. And I feel honored that I'm part of this esteemed panel. In my opinion, this is a very widespread and deep-rooted problem with a lot of, in a lot of parts of this world. But since we are focusing on South Asian and especially our Desi community, I'm afraid that this has been this has been allowed to go on for a very long time and definitely needs to be addressed. And it takes on even a more important meaning when this applies to people or our community living in the US or foreign countries per se. And that is because not only are we dealing, like Anuji kind of alluded to that, not only are we dealing with a bias on a white and non-white basis, but also the second layer is that within the community itself, we have to fight this menace of bias or prejudice based simply on the shade of the color. So it is definitely, like I said, it needs to be addressed. As far as my personal experiences, yes, I guess I was not immune to it. And I don't know, you said I don't look that dark, but I don't know. Out of the two siblings that I grew up with, I was the darker. And I remember very clearly, I don't know if this had a major impact on me, but I remember I definitely must have had something to do with it, because I remember this. And he was a little bit light, in color, and I was darker. So he would get a lot of affection. People would come and say, "Kinna sona, kitna sundar hai, how beautiful, how white, chikna," all kinds of things. And they would give him, affection and all that. And I remember asking my mom, God bless her soul, if she had not handled this right, maybe I would have probably been impacted more. But, I always felt that I was loved less than he was. So that, having said that, I'll pass on the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Yes, and that's very common. I mean, being Punjabi, I can definitely relate to that, because the kinna sona gora chitta is a very
Right.
standard line amongst us. It comes automatically when babies are born, right? The first is the gender, is it a boy? And then the second question is how gora chitta is he, right? And I never figured that one out, because now being a grandma, I get asked the same questions. It's when my daughter was expecting the babies, and even when the babies were born and people called to congratulate me, I used to get the question, who did they look like? It was kind of indirect, but I knew what they were, leading towards. And I myself I have two daughters who are very different shades. One took after one side of the family, one took after the other, and they both have had to bear the brunt of it. And I've always had to correct people and say, can you not say, it's a very obvious, who do you look like? Whose color do you have? And then I get asked, are these your children? So that can be very hurtful, when technically we're meant to be brown people, and I've never figured that out. So one of my questions, Vanita, is to you, because you're in the theater business. Nandita, and what are your thoughts on this? Nandita Das talks about how whenever there was a role of a rural woman, she would always get it. But when she had to play the educated upper middle class, someone always had to say, I have to lighten your skin. Why is that the case?
So actually, Enact Arts had done a conversation with Nandita last year when she was here. It was a beautiful conversation. For 2 hours, she talked about how art and activism are so intrinsically, connected in her life. And she is the champion of sultry, dusky actresses. And she is the one who has made sultry and dusky admirable and desirable traits. Before that, sultry meant you can't be a mainstream actor in a Bollywood movie. You have to be in an indie film, which is exactly what Nandita is talking about. I want to say that in theater, we don't face this issue so much, because we invite theater audiences to come on a journey with us where they can imagine a few more things. But in film, this is a huge, huge issue. And I think what we need is probably another 10, 20, 40 more Nandita Dases and, some Sabyasachis who use darker skinned models to show that the notion of beauty is something that we have concocted for ourselves and that it can be changed. I want to sort of present the idea of this Darwinian theory of selection. The mother-in-law wants a fair daughter-in-law for her son because she thinks that that's a desirable trait that will propagate the family in a desirable manner. We have to change the thinking into becoming mother-in-laws who want a desirable trait in a daughter-in-law that could be she brings up the children better, or she has more economic power and she has a voice and an opinion and can stand up for her own beliefs. And it's going to probably take a generation or two, but I think fundamentally as mothers, we have a very important role to play, because we have the power to change the thinking, obviously of the women of our daughters to stand up for themselves against this kind of injustice, but also to grow men who value women for what's inside rather than what's outside, and to embrace the idea of beauty that spans an entire spectrum of color, rather than saying beauty comes from skin color. Beauty should come from many things. Beauty should come from, the odor of your skin, which is such a personal thing. Beauty should come from the way your eyes move, or the way your body reacts to somebody's presence. Beauty should come from chemistry between two people, not from an absolute notion of beauty that the cosmetics industry or the film industry wants to shove down our throat. I think we need to be much more savvy consumers of products that presume to tell us what beauty is, instead of having us define it for ourselves individually.
Thank you. So from that note, you brought up the beauty products. We have a question from one of our listeners, and I'll pose that to Anu. So the question is from Vedika. She says, we all know we have a faulty society, but when are we going to start seeing change? Do we stop the fairness products, the skin lightening treatments, or should we work on the society's thinking? What is the way to make change here?
I think we attack it both ways. As Vineeta said, I think each of us starts defining what beauty is and not cling on to this colonial version of what beauty was or how it was defined. It's how we interact with each other. It's how we react to things in society. I mean, when Nina Davuluri became Miss America, some of the comments from the Desi community was, she may be exotic and dark brown and chocolate colored here, but she could never be Miss India, because in India, we prefer our beauty queens to be strictly vanilla, right? And so the same Indian American standards here versus what happens in India also begins to define beauty for our Desi community. So I think we attack it in two ways. I mean, the biggest way we can make change happen is through money and how we spend money on beauty products. And if we stop buying Fair and Lovely and that market crashes, capitalism has a way of defining and redefining beauty. So as Vineeta said, if each of us begin to define beauty in different ways, in individual ways, and start accepting people for who they are, we can start making change happen. There's some change that can be immediate, and some change takes much, much longer. It could be a generation or 2 generations. But as long as we start working with our daughters as mothers and give them the confidence to say that they are beautiful no matter what their skin color is, I think that begins to change this conversation. And the more we talk about beauty in different ways and not really cling on to this notion of fair is beautiful, dark is dark and evil, it'll make a change. And I think also looking really carefully at language and some of the intrinsic bias that's in our languages. Why is it that people are blacklisted, right? And why do we use a black bin for our garbage? I mean, these are all intrinsic things where we are continuing to say black is ugly, white is pure, beautiful. So I think we need to be conscious about some of these biases and prejudices. We need to start talking about it and seeing how we can make change. And we need to use our pocketbooks. We need to make sure that we buy products that do not perpetuate this prejudice.
Thanks, Anu. And yeah, go ahead. Did you have something to say, Vineeta?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that with, what's wrong with being individualistic and arrogant and saying, I define beauty for myself. I will not let a chemical company define it for me, and I will not let my grandmother define it for me. I'm going to stand up and define my beauty myself. And our boys and our girls, as parents, that's what the goal that we should give them.
Thank you. At this point, because we have a young lady that's just joined us, so Sunny, I'm actually going to invite our guest, Sheena, on board. And for the reason that I can see probably a baby is sleeping now. So she did mention to me earlier that, Renu, I'm not sure how I'll, take to a live show if my baby's awake. So I can see baby's probably sleeping.
Yes.
Hi, Sheena. So I'm going to bring you on just to take full advantage of that. So welcome to our show. This is Sheena Smedley, and she's based in Sacramento, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on board. And so I brought on Sheena to talk about her experience, which kind of ties in with our Desi thinking. And Sheena will tell you her story. And the question is going to be from actually one of our audiences. They've said, how is the bias different for Black versus brown? So you probably know why I've asked you that question now, Sheena. So if you can take on and tell us your personal experience and your personal journey, and rather than me do the introduction.
Okay, so I heard someone said there's no dark person on this video thing. I am pretty dark, I think. So,
You're not.
so I'm actually married to an African American guy. My family, I've always gotten a question that, oh, how did your family react to that? That was the very first question I always get if I tell another Indian person that my husband is African American. So I think that itself is pretty, I don't like being asked that question, I would say, because to me, my husband is human. He's not, I don't differentiate him because of his color, because I'm not light skinned either. And I've grown up where I have 3 older sisters, and my sisters are all pretty lighter than me. I'm probably the darkest in my family. So I've heard that all my life, that, oh, are you guys really sisters? You don't look like them, you're darker. I've grown up hearing that a lot. I've actually had a few guy friends from India who've told me that, oh, they live here in the US, and they've told me, oh, you're a really nice girl. Too bad my mom won't like you because you're dark skinned, or I would marry you. I've heard that multiple times. And I had a friend, a really good friend, that told me, don't ever waste your time dating a Punjabi or any kind of light skinned guy from India, because their mom will not want you because you're dark skinned.
And let me ask you a question. How did your parents react when you went home and said you were dating a Black American? What
My
was their
mom,
response?
personally, my family, they don't care about skin color. That my mom always told me, as long as you're happy, you marry whoever you want to marry. And there's nothing wrong with my husband. He comes from a great family. He has a great job. He has very strong beliefs about God. He's a perfect guy, for me at least. So my mom never saw any reason to say she wouldn't want. My mom actually is in Fiji still. She lives in Fiji. So before I got married, I took my husband to Fiji to meet my mom. And he went to Fiji and actually touched, in Indian culture, you touch people's feet for like blessings. So my husband has been watching Indian movies with me, so he knows to do that. So he went home to Fiji and he did that when he met my mom without me even telling him.
Which probably most Indian boys would not do.
No. And my mom said the same thing. My mom was like, could not have asked God for a better son-in-law than this, because he has so much respect. So I just don't understand the whole dark skin, light skin. And I think it's rude that we actually put color to a person, like, oh, that's a kala, just because we call Black kala. Like, I don't like that fact that we call people by their color, like, oh, that's a white person, wo gora hai, or that's a kala person. I think that itself is like parents teaching their kids that, like, oh, that's a kala, that's a gora. Like, I don't think that's okay.
And in closing, Sheena, I know you have a beautiful little daughter. And so how are you going to raise her? Because I'm sure she's going to get asked questions like, where are you from? Because she's beautiful. I've seen her. She's absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. You guys have a beautiful family, but she's probably going to get addressed that question in school. You live in Sacramento, where there are a lot of Indians, and they're probably going to look at the curly hair, and she definitely looks mixed, and say, where are you from? How are you going to raise your daughter? How are you going to address her question when she comes and asks you, Mom, what is my color?
I would tell her, there's no color. You're human, you're beautiful. There's no color. Like, everybody, we cut ourselves, our blood is all red. Like, it doesn't matter to me, it does not matter what's on the outside. Someone could be super light skinned and whatnot, but deep inside in their heart, they might not be a good person. So it's who you are from the inside than more of what you are from the outside.
Thank you, Sheena. I know it was difficult for you to take a few moments, and God bless you. Thank you for your thoughts, and thank you for coming in and sharing your views. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Sunny, we have a comment here. Actually, it's from my daughter, Shauna. And I'm going to throw that question at you, because this is something that Punjabis are very famous for saying. And her comment is, even if one isn't dark, Indian parents love to tell their children not to go out swimming or play in case they get dark. You know, they'll tell you, don't go out in summer, you know, and we get this all the time in preschool. I'll have parents who say, during summer, don't have my child go outside. And another example, Shana says, is code black is the worst hospital code you can use. I mean, as Anu mentioned before, we have these terms with the black garbage can. What are your thoughts on what parents should be doing now when your child wants to play outside and they talk about getting dark in the sun?
So yes, thank you. So I feel that this exactly is what the problem is. This issue is so deep rooted in our psyche that we tend to inadvertently or purposely, we keep going back to these things and attributing beauty to fairness, or asking kids not to do certain things because that will make them dark, just like Sheena said. And we, in order for us to be able to handle this, I think we will have to deal with this on multiple levels, because this is entire society. So unless we are prepared to look at our literature, look at our music, our poetry, everything where white is associated with beautiful and dark is associated with ugliness somehow. So on an individual level, as a parent or as a member of the family or a friend, whenever you see a behavior like this or something being said on these lines, it's very important for us to take a stance right away, no matter who it is, and step in and say, hey, you know what, this is not right. This is where you are making a mistake. Why don't you say it this way? That if you have a concern about their skin getting affected by sun, why don't you say it this way rather than this? So that would be on an individual level. But like I said, it needs to be addressed on multiple levels. And I think, banning these ads and these products in countries like India, where government can still, play a major role in how businesses are run, would be a very useful step in the right direction.
And I think it also impacts us even when people are hiring.
Right.
When they're hiring for different professions and stuff, I know there's a lot of bias when it comes to color. And again, back to preschool, I've had many times, unfortunately, again, referring to Desis, they'll come in and they know they can't ask me if we have any, non-Indians in the school. So they'll target it in a different way. Do you have those kind of people? And I often look and say, what do you mean by those kind of people? And for some reason, they associate anyone that's low income for some reason always with darkness. I've never been able to figure that out. There's a comment here from somebody, Ankita, and she's written, I'm just going to read this comment and I'm going to ask a question to Vanita. She says that she doesn't think this color bias is ever going to fade. She thinks we're the product of our environment. And she says that her cousin grew up with the brother being very light skinned and her being darker. And the father used to always say, ye to kali hai, iski jada dowry lagegi, because she's kali. Yes. And there's so many Indian movies that are also made where if they're trying to get the dark girl, the dark sister married, they'll keep the light skinned sister in the room. So on that note, Vanita, what replaces color bias then?
Education, I think. As you know, education replaces biases and inequalities in pretty much everything. Fundamentally, if somebody understood that color comes from the amount of melatonin in your skin, and that having extra melatonin is a built-in sunscreen and you can stay out longer and you're actually healthier, so better suited for life, and in a Darwinian world, which wasn't colored by the language of white being the top end of the spectrum and black being the bottom of the spectrum, naturally we would have flipped that. So that's definitely one thing. The other thing is that some ideals and biases are so deeply rooted in society that you can only change them by calling out in the form of a movement. And we've seen that in the movement that is triggering this conversation. You call it out, you make it a movement, you address it in a way that carries momentum, and it's a rolling stone, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it gets enough momentum to get enough conversation with enough people to achieve critical mass to make an inflection point in the thinking. So I think conversation and education are the two things that I put my money on. And then I just go back to let's educate mothers to bring up their boys correctly.
Yes, absolutely. And you talk about genetics. Yeah, we know our skin is determined by the melanin. So is the gender. When parents the woman is always blamed for not producing a son. They don't realize that our choices are only the double X chromosome, and
Yes.
I've spent years battling this one. And Anu, being a mom of a young teenager growing up here, and you've addressed, some of the things that she's run into, what is your suggestion to all the moms out there in terms of how they can empower their young girls to believe that they are beautiful, especially in a society that is so judgmental, even here? And I feel that our desis are even more judgmental, just as bad. I mean, India, it's bad enough, but here the same mentality is carried forth over here. How do you empower your young daughters to not grow up with this complex?
I think it's this constant conversation to make sure that they're not impacted by all of the offensive language that's used against darker girls, and to really give them the strength to believe that they are whoever they want to be, and they're not defined by the color of their skin. And also, I think, as Vinita said, it's really putting a name to this. We've never talked about this issue. We just assume it's intrinsic, it's part of our culture. And as Shauna has said, I mean, you don't have these conversations with our parents or anybody in their generation because that's offensive. So you just carry that culturally through generations. So I think it's having these talks with your daughters and sons and the next generation, and saying, teaching them to fight back or push back some of these things that they're going to face. And I'm just going to give you an example of what my daughter faced. She and a Black friend of hers were getting ready for one of their school dances, and a 4-year-old brother of one of the white girls who was also with them looked at the three of them and he says, "White, black, brown." 4-year-old. He's looking at them and judging them by their colors. And so we looked at the mother, and the mother says, "Oh, he's learning his colors in school." So it's obviously something that his parents have taught him at that young age. And so I think the thing that we can do is equip our daughters and sons to be aware of this, to push back, and give them enough confidence to say that they're not defined by the color of their skin.
Thank you. Sheena, I know I'm going to ask you the question. You grew up here, right? You grew up here, so you spent.
I moved here when I was 19, so yeah.
Okay, you moved here when you were 19. So you came from the Fiji Islands. Do they have the same issue over there? We've been talking about desis in India, but there are plenty of desis in.
Not really.
No,
not really. It's not as big as it is. I have not experienced it as bad as I have here after I moved here. And the sad thing is, it's only the Indian people that are worried about skin color. White people, they don't care. They love our skin color. I've gotten so many compliments from white people for my skin color. They tell me, we pay money to get the skin color.
I was going to get to that. Yes.
Yes. So I don't understand why we can't love each other as like our own people.
Well, they pay a lot of money to get tanned, and we pay a lot of money to get bleached.
Get white, right?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Sunny, since we deal with a lot of the elder generation, Shauna would like to ask you, and then we will be bringing Akansh on. I'm waiting for Akansh to come on. Shauna wants to ask you, how can we educate the elder generation without offending them? You know how you get the old nannies and the nanas who say, "Oh, bahut soni si, bahut gori chitti dudh vangan." They always relate gori chitti to dudh vangan. I don't know what they're going to relate the wheatish complexion to, maybe to atta, or I don't know. How do you tell a nanny and a nana? I mean, I've corrected my mother many times and I tell her, stop, but how do you do that without them offending you? Because they'll say, but that's how it is.
Yeah, you said it right, because I don't mean to sound condescending or disrespectful, but let's face it, with all due respect to them, it's probably going to be much harder to change their way of thinking or how they perceive things. What we should be more concerned and working towards is how to change the mindset of the current generation and the future generations to come, because we still have it within our hands to frame this discussion, as Anuji said and Vinitaji said. So I think yes, if a topic comes up, I would personally tell them to inform them that, hey, this is something that people's idea of conversation or their thought process has changed or evolved. But again, the focus has to be on the newer generation and people who are, especially, and I want to make one more point. What really concerns me is that this kind of a bias or prejudice should not seep into employment or, hiring practices and promotions and development within our diaspora here or in foreign countries, because now a lot of desis per se are in positions where they can hire, they can create policy, they can influence, a lot of the change. So if this kind of a bias is seeping in, and one thing that would probably help is some studies or some kind of an empirical data. And as Anuji was referencing a case study in which Nina Dawaluri was the subject. There were some instances where there was a discrimination based simply on the color of their skin within the Desi community. So it is very important that we deal with this and everyone plays their own part. So once again, focus on the newer generation. So because we are the ones who are going to bring about change.
Right. I found some interesting fact that I want to share with everyone that will probably shock everyone, but it was mentioned that by 2020, the skin lightening industry is set to mushroom into a $23 billion business globally. And this is from the Global Industry Analyst. And even 10 years ago, a report estimated that just India alone accounts for 432 million worth of skin whitening products, with Unilever's best-selling Fair and Lovely as being the best. They take the considerable chunk of that, the money. And also all the 12 Miss India finalists this year were fair, thin and tall. So, we need to see change for sure. And one thing that Nandita has said is, she says, we keep saying things like uska rang saaf hai. So when people translate that uska rang saaf hai, saaf means clean. So we are alluding to the fact that dark skin is dirty when we say things like that. Yeah. So on that note, I'd like to begin wrapping up. We've got about 15 minutes. Is Akansh ready to come on air?
Yes, Renuji, I am here. There is an issue with my camera, so I won't be able to stream in my video, but I'm pretty sure and I'm hopeful that you're able to hear my voice.
Yes, we are. I was actually waiting for the video, so thank you, but we'll miss seeing your face. But welcome to the show, Akansh. So I know you have your 2 cents you would like to share with all of us, so please go ahead.
Thanks a lot for giving me a chance to speak on this forum. So just like you, I am an ethnic Punjabi, and I cannot emphasize enough how much whitewash Punjabi community loves. So you don't have to go beyond and see color judgment in the US. Like India itself is a reflection of what racism means. And yeah, that's pretty unfortunate because primarily it's our self-obsession with the white skin that has developed into some sort of self-loathing. And within Radio Zindagi, I am known to be very direct about my comments. So I know that North Indian people in generally have a tendency to look down upon South Indian people just because of their color. And that is so deeply entrenched in our mindsets that we tend to act as if we are very forward and we are very intermingling and open to association when we are in parties, when we are at work. But back when we are in our homes, the discussion is, oh, dekhi thi kinni kali thi, stuff like that. This is 21st century America. I'm not even talking about India. And this is a sorry state of affairs because we are not only raising our kids. I listened to Anu's point about white people, and I actually fully agree with, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, but I see S. Medley. So
That's Sheena.
I fully agree with Sheena that white people are by and far and large very more accommodating than the Indian people. You'll be surprised to know how much more accommodating they are. And it's like they are very appreciative of your skin, of your qualities. And I fully agree with her. And I don't know what we can do about it. See, it's a very far-fetched thing to say that we need to do something, we need to do something. We need to cure our minds. That is as simple as that. It is a psychological problem. It is a disease where you are judging people by their appearance. Why won't you look for their qualities? Like, why does the face become so important? And coming from the Eastern traditions, we have always had this Eastern philosophy that the soul is more important. The beauty is skin deep. When we are coming from such a rich tradition, why do we have to worry so much about our skin tones or about not even skin tone? That's also the way your color looks. I think straight hair is always in demand, and hair straightening is as big an industry, particularly with women, as a skin whitening. I have a very small incident to share. I'll just wrap it up in a couple of minutes if I have time.
Yes, go ahead.
So there was this cousin of mine, and we grew up together. She is my age, the most humble girl you would ever meet, and she was extremely well raised as per Punjabi traditions. Like I could go back to some patriarchy here, but she could cook, she could clean, she could take care of the entire household. She was very well educated. She could converse in English. I'm putting in all the stereotypes, you know, that you need to be successful in today's society. Her bad luck was that her complexion was on her father's side, and it was pretty dark. She grew up listening to these comments like कि इसका रंग काला है, कितना करेंगे, वगैरह वगैरह, दाज भी देना पड़ेगा, दाज देना पड़ेगा, and all those things. We grew up together, and we were, I mean, you don't pay much attention to those things until and unless my own mother, she stood up and she actually quarreled with one of these uncles, and she said, why the hell you have to bring her color time and again? Have you ever looked at her qualities? Have you ever tried to appreciate how well she's managing your household with your wife alongside? And luckily, she got married to someone who appreciates her qualities a lot. But a very important point I have to mention here is that the way your family raises you has a fundamental impact on your psychology. That was a defining day for me, like a defining day as in color is not the criteria. Look at the qualities. And with that, I'll wrap up my conversation with you and the fact that beauty is skin deep. It's not just a metaphorical thought. It's a very, very valid argument. And if we have to live together, we have to learn to appreciate that the goodness goes beyond your looks, and it is way beyond your color tone. Thank you, Renuji.
Thank you so much. And it'll probably start with changing some of those matrimonial ads when it says, want, you know, it's funny that the ads are always posted for fair, light-skinned girls, but you'll never see women asking for fair, light-skinned men, right? So as I said, I used to run a matrimonial agency for about 5 years, and I was blown away with how many times the men always said, even if they didn't want a light-skinned girl, it was always when mom says, she has to be light-skinned. And then the question is how light-skinned? They want them to look like dud, like milk, right? And my message to all the listeners out there, especially our Desi community, is when we teach colors to children in preschool, right? You teach them about color mixing. Brown is brown. And unless you mix brown with another color, it's going to remain brown. It's not going to become anything else. So we're brown folks, guys, you know, and we're going to remain brown. So if you really want light skin, then go ahead and mix them with light. Otherwise, be happy with what you've got. And definitely we need to change the perspective of how we teach color in preschools and younger children, because we're guilty of that. You know, I mean, I think we're always taught to put black away only because it ruins the paper. But again, and we also don't use white because there's no color. I think we definitely need to start introducing that. And Anu, I was glad to see that in the stores. I went to a couple of stores last week looking for dolls for Gia, that I'm actually seeing some brown dolls there. So that's a good sign, and hopefully things will change. So as we wrap up, I'd like everyone to give something in closing about, your thoughts on this. We have this topic today. It is a sensitive topic. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of people giving feedback. Your thoughts on what kind of change you would like to see, and what kind of change you feel you're going to make to this topic as an individual.
I think Sheena
So
had
we'll start
something
with
to
you,
say.
Vinita. Yes.
No, Sheena has something to say, so I'm going to let her start. She's been
Okay, Sheena.
itching to chime in.
Yes,
for
I have to go. So I'm going to say something really quick and then I have to leave. So I think a platform that could be used to educate people is Bollywood, because we tend to see whatever they do and we like to copy whatever they wear. Bollywood is a big platform, I think, and if it starts from there, then people can watch and learn. They need to have more dark-skinned actors and actors in movies, and not just light skin. And if people are dark, they try and give them creams and make them light. Like
Right.
Priyanka Chopra,
Right.
she was never light skinned, but she's doing all these ads for light skin. So I think Bollywood is the best platform to make changes.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you so much for participating, and good luck with the baby.
Thank you.
Yes. Bollywood's in a lot of trouble right now. Bollywood's going to deal with a lot of things right now, in addition to, of course, changing their whole perspective about the kind of women that they bring on board. They need to deal with stop their nepotism as well, which is another subject. And really quickly, listeners, this topic has become so popular, we're definitely going to have a sequel on this. So if anyone out there wants to participate, share your personal experiences, share your views, we'd love to hear from you. Contact Radio Zindagi at 510-657-1170, or definitely post on their Facebook, and Seba or Ira will reach out to you. So Vinita, back to you.
So the interesting thing that, which I'm sure most of our audience has picked up in this conversation, is that the idea of skin color for Desis is so intrinsically connected with this fear of, will I get married or will I not get married? And I think the two probably need to be addressed together. I think the Me Too movement needs to add color into its mandate. I think as consumers, men, women, any human being of any gender, if we can start a movement that says, I'm just going to boycott companies that push this narrative, whether it's a Bollywood film that I won't pay for, or a product that I won't buy for because they also sell products that comment on skin tones, just boycott it. It's not that these products shouldn't be available. I think the use of the product should not be tied into, I'm doing this because I need to improve my own sense of self-worth. And so the pressures need to be off on several different levels, in that respect. I'm going to hand it over to Anu.
Thank you. Anu?
Thank you. I think we need to continue to have these conversations and call out people, much like racism, on colorism, and say this is wrong. And we start building a movement around it, and provide confidence to the folks that don't have the self-worth or looking for role models to see someone on film in the advertising world that look like themselves. And as much as we agree or disagree or dislike Never Have I Ever, the Mindy Kaling show, I think what she did was put in people that were dark-skinned.
I think that Mindy Kaling is a role model on so many levels for so many of us. She broke so many stereotypes, and her work addresses so many subjects, and she calls out stereotypes. She's a great role model. We should have her on the show next time.
And I think carrying that forward and enabling other people to provide them with a platform with that show was really great for younger kids who watch the dark-skinned girl that played the main role. And so I think it's important for us to start looking at role models and pulling them in and showcasing them. But the most important thing I think we should do, Renu, is to continue this conversation. And as controversial as it is to continue to push back.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. And before I move over to Sunny, even our ERA, our RJ, who will be moving back to shortly, says we, we have to mend our ways. I mean, everybody, we all have to mend our ways because I'm guilty of this too. I've also used comments like Kali Godi, and sometimes you do it without realizing how insensitive we're being. So, Sunny, in closing, what do you have to say?
So to sum up, I mean, I would just remind everyone that this is a very deep-rooted issue. And Anuji had alluded to it, that it might take a few generations to correct this, but the work has to start. The conversation has to continue, and an effort has to be made on different levels, individual level, social level, and some thing has to be done from the government or the leaders, and then we have to look at the literature, and so many points. But everything will be easier if we communicate and we talk about this more often.
Thank you. Yes, and as Shailaja Shelly Arora just said, in her opinion, she thinks that this all started with the British invading India, and we got this complex about color. Because initially we do know that, I'll give an example. It's very strange that in my school, when if I have an American receptionist, the Indians will always be super polite to her and never say anything to her. But if I have one of us Desis in the front, we're just going to get walked all over. It seems that the white color is even given respect, even when you're paying tuition. And I've never figured that one out. So for all my listeners out there, I think we all need to mend our ways. I really think we need to start educating ourselves first. And if you are guilty of passing comments like Kaliya, Godiya, I want a Godi Chitti, a Dudwangan daughter-in-law or whatever. And even when babies are born, passing comments about who they look like and saying things like, even when you make a comment like, oh, this is what I used to hear. Oh, she must look like her dad. What do you mean by, oh, she must look like her dad? Why not, oh, wow, she looks like her dad, or he looks like her dad. But women get affected a lot more. So on that note, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And it's been a pleasure hosting this show. This is one of my favorite topics. Anu knows how I love to deal with controversy. And it's been wonderful having all of you share your personal experiences. And thank you again. And thank you especially to Radio Zindagi, to Ira, Seba, Neeraj. You guys always give us this platform. We've been addressing so many issues here. And now that the hot topic right now online is, of course, Bollywood and nepotism, I think, this bullying also happens with color in Bollywood as well. They definitely don't give the roles of the main roles to the dusky ones. So thank you again. And until next week, stay safe, everyone, and have lots of fun.
Thank you, Renu, for addressing such an important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny, Anu.